Okay, I will call the meeting to order at 6:30 right now. And Aaron, if you could call the roll for us, please.
Of course. Chair Diaz-Nash,
Present?
Vice Chair Hedges,
Present.
Committee Member, I'm so sorry, Naomi, how do you say your last name?
Chu.
Chu, okay.
Present.
Okay. Committee Member Morgan,
Present.
Committee Member Simonitis.
Present.
Okay, all committee members are accounted for.
Thank you. And I do not see it on the agenda, but I think we should all recite the Pledge of Allegiance as we normally do. If that would be okay by everyone, I will just lead it and we can all follow. Place your hand over your heart and repeat after me and stand up. I pledge allegiance
Pledge allegiance
to the
To the
flag
flag
of the United States
United
of
States
America
of America,
and to the
the
republic
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 for which it stands,
for which it
one
stands,
nation
one nation,
under God,
under God,
indivisible,
indivisible.
with liberty and
liberty
justice
and
for all.
justice for all.
Thank you very much. Please be seated. And on that note, Director Lee, why don't we turn the meeting over to you? You have a lot of things to share with us and a lot of discussion to be had.
Yes, I do. Thank you, and good evening. I have a brief presentation and happy to go into additional discussion with the committee. I'm really combining the two agenda items into one for my purposes. First is going to be the update on the current fiscal year, and then we'll transition to the proposed budget for next fiscal year.
And may I make the request that you share the slides afterwards?
Absolutely.
I'm sure everyone will be interested in them. Thank you.
So first, the update on the current fiscal year. So this is our balance sheet as of today, and the balance sheet, it's showing your assets, liabilities, and equities. Assets, that's all cash, so that's $5.5 million in cash. The fund has no liabilities, and of the total equity, we have $100,000 in reserve for encumbrance. So those reflect purchase orders that are outstanding, and that ensures that we reserve those resources for those outstanding contractual obligations. The designated for CIP, those are our Measure S funded capital improvement projects. And for the same purpose, we're designating those reserves specifically for those projects to ensure that those resources are dedicated for that purpose. And then the unrestricted surplus is the remainder. So any remaining equity in the fund is unrestricted and available for appropriation by the City Council. All told, total equity is $5.7 million. On the income side, income statement, we're showing our revenues and expenditures. First, the Measure S sales tax. We had budgeted $5.5 million. Through April, we've accounted for $3.7 million of that. And based on the latest estimate that we have from our sales tax consultant, we believe we will end just shy of the budget at $5.4 million. So about a $100,000 difference there. On the expenditure side, we had budgeted $1.9 million. And through April, we've spent $1.3 million. And our year-end estimate for total expenditures for Measure S is $1.5 million. As noted in the administrative report, really the driver behind that variance is the senior transportation vouchers, and that's directly associated with the pandemic. Really, that trend significantly evaporated because of the pandemic.
And the driver behind that variance was no pun intended, correct?
No pun intended at all.
Great. And I guess I should make the comment that given how incredibly unknown things were at the beginning of the fiscal year, I'm really impressed with how tight the budget is, the actuals versus what the budget said it would be. I mean, given what we didn't know, we didn't know.
One of the thank you. One of the exercises that we did during last year's budget development cycle was to use a model that our sales tax consultant gave to us and came up with some assumptions for specifically sales tax and Measure S transactions and use tax, and how that would be impacted by sector. So when I say sector, I mean broad categories of general retail, food industry, restaurants, business to business, and not all business categories are created equal. So some have been more heavily impacted, such as general retail and food services, and construction and business to business less so. And that has, I'm getting a little bit of an echo, sorry about that.
Okay.
But that has come to fruition. And
I have my hand raised.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for Rich to finish speaking. Rich, so.
yes, go ahead.
Okay,
please.
so Rich Hedges, please.
Yeah, so CCAG had $3.39 million in lifeline funds. Of that, they granted us 320,000. I assume they granted it to us. I was in the committee that recommended it. I didn't vote on it because I live in San Mateo, but the committee unanimously outside of me recommended it. And it was only subscribed for 1.7 million. So there's about 1.6 left over, which they're going to do another cycle next year instead of, they usually do it every 2 years, but since money's left over, they're going to do another cycle. So here's my question. I actually have two. The first question is, of that 320,000, since it was granted for lifeline, that stays in the fund whether we use it or not, right?
I actually don't know. My understanding is it's based on a reimbursement basis. So if we don't use the funds during over a certain period of time, it may be subject to returning it back to CCAG. I hope that we take full advantage of the full grant amount. And to be clear, that grant is not reflected in the current fiscal year. That's really reflected in the next portion of the presentation.
And my second question, and Naomi serves on the same CAC at the TA, and she can jump in if she heard something different. I believe I heard one of the consultants, I think 2 months ago, say that our sales tax revenue has not been that bad, and the Wayfair decision on online sales has saved us a great deal. Do you see the same thing for San Mateo, if in fact that's true?
It has offset some of the losses that we've had. However, there's, I'd like to say I coined this term, but that's probably not the case. I probably just heard it somewhere and marked it as my own. There's been over the past year what I call localization of use tax. So that's really what where the Wayfair use taxes that are being recognized in the county pools. Let me back up a little bit. So there's sales tax, there's use tax, and there's transactions and use tax. The latter is that's what Measure S is. So regardless of all transactions and use tax for Measure S, that's 100% San Mateo. We get all of that. The sales tax, pure sales tax, that's the Bradley Burns Uniform Sales and Use Tax Law. That's our local 1%. Then there's the use tax portion. So use tax is essentially sales tax, but it's applied to online transactions or people that are from out of state buying from companies in California. All of that is recognized as use tax. So, and I appreciate you bringing this up. The Wayfair decision, it was a landmark change in from the Supreme Court. Prior to that, the Supreme Court decision it was the Quill decision that essentially said, in order for companies to be compelled to collect use tax, they had to have a physical presence in the state. So that was the prevailing case law for years. And then Wayfair happened in 2018, which reversed that. And now there's a threshold that determines if a business is required to collect use tax. And the Supreme Court gave the latitude for every state to adopt their own threshold to determine when a business would be required to collect use tax. If you ask me how much the threshold is in California, I couldn't tell you. But what I can tell you is that it's done on an individual state basis. So to answer your question, yes, that has benefited the city. However, there have been 3 developments that have happened in the past 12 months effectively that have degraded that impact. The first is an agreement between the city of San Jose and eBay that localized the recognition of use tax solely to the city of San Jose. What that means is that any transactions that generated use tax that we had been seeing in our county pool and been allocated a portion of, we no longer get. A very similar agreement between the city of San Bruno and Walmart, setting the city of San Bruno as the situs for those transactions, also reduced our county pools. More recently, I'd say this is within the past month, is a change in the way that Amazon records its transactions, its taxable sales. Online transactions had, and this actually predates the Wayfair decision. This was an agreement that then Governor Brown came to with Amazon to compel them to collect use tax. And since that time, that was about 2014 or 15, the city had been collecting use tax through the county pools through Amazon. Very recently, a new development is Amazon, instead of having all of its use tax flow through the county pools, instead is, and I'm still waiting for more information on this, but approximately 50% of that use tax is now going to flow through their fulfillment centers. So what that means is a short subset of cities in California are going to be winners, and everybody else are going to be losers. And San Mateo, unfortunately, and all of San Mateo County are in the latter category.
So I have another question for you then, and it's probably better for the city attorney. How can 2 parties, a city and a business, make an agreement that goes around a Supreme Court decision?
Yes, that's definitely a question for the city attorney. Out of my area of expertise, I share similar concerns. This was a question, I asked a similar question, phrased differently, to the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration during a webinar that they held, talking about, again, my coined phrase of localization of use tax. And my question was, is this what we can expect in the future, where you have major retailers with an online presence entering into an agreement with cities where their global headquarters are? Because that's effectively what San Bruno and San Jose did. The answer I got was, we don't think so. The 2 players, eBay, Walmart, they think that's probably going to be the majority that will have a material impact on use tax. But I would not hold my breath that's going to be accurate. So we're working with our sales tax advisor and monitoring discussions on the California Society of Municipal Finance Officers knowledge base for our colleagues, talking about similar topics and how it's impacting their municipalities and counties.
Somebody's going to follow us. One of the major cities.
Exactly.
Yes, I think that's likely.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Very instructive. Thank you, Richard.
My pleasure. Any other questions about the current fiscal year financial update? If not, I'm going to move on to the again a preview of the proposed budget. Just for a recap, I know the members have been with this committee for a number of years, so this is nothing different than years past. What staff is asking for the committee to do is to make a recommendation to the City Council for the proposed budget for Measure S that is before you, and that's part of your charge as a committee, specifically in the ordinance. For Measure S, for next fiscal year, we are anticipating ongoing recovery, specifically for Measure S, to get back to that 2018-19 baseline year, pre-pandemic. We're looking at about a 10% increase compared to our year-end estimate for the current fiscal year. On top of that is the CCAG grant that Vice Chair mentioned. That's $160,000. So all told, for total revenues for Measure S fund, that's $6.3 million. On the expenditure side, we're looking at $1.7 million for salaries and benefits. I noted the specific job classifications that are allocated to Measure S in the staff report. There's also the operating costs, primarily for these senior transportation vouchers, and all told, $1.9 million. The lion's share of the cost for Measure S for next fiscal year is in transfers out. If you look a little bit further in the staff report, I talk about these specific capital improvement program projects based on the committee's recommendation for projects that for funding as a part of the CIP next year, and based on the available resources in this fund, and based on the direction from the committee, we're able to accommodate all of those projects. So that's reflected in the $2 million that Measure S will be transferring out to the CIP fund. There's also the repayment of the I guess Measure S initiatives that were paid by the general fund prior to Measure S transactions and use tax revenues coming in to the fund. That's a 10-year repayment at about $300,000 per year. Fiscal year 2021 was year one, so next year will be year two of that repayment. And then finally, as you may recall, in February of 2020, the city, through the financing authority, issued approximately $43 million in lease revenue bonds. That was to finance the cost of flood improvements as well as street rehabilitation costs. So that debt service began this year, and for next year, that's $2.7 million. So all told, for all transfers out for CIP, for the repayment to the general fund, and for debt service payment, that's $5 million. So when you net the total revenues coming in at $6.3 million, less the expenditures of $1.9 million, and less the transfers out, that's a net loss of $600,000. And based on the balance sheet that was shown a few slides earlier, Measure S certainly has the capacity to take on the net loss, and effectively this is a planned use of available resources.
Rich, do you have a question? Your hand is still raised.
No, sorry, I didn't take it in.
Okay.
I'll fix that.
Does anyone have questions for Rich about this slide? None? Okay. Then I guess we can move on.
And I just wanted to
Rich,
recap.
at
Yes,
some
go ahead.
point, whenever you think it's appropriate, could you share with the rest of the committee what you shared with me in email about, you know, when there was incremental expense for the Smooth Streets program, and Public Works had to go to council for additional funding. And I had a question to you about how does that impact Measure S? And you had an explanation about the funds. So it just, because that was a substantial incremental expense. So
If and I apologize, that was a few weeks ago. If I remember the email discussion correctly, Measure S is one of many funding sources for the city's street improvement projects, namely, besides Measure S, gas tax, Measure W. Those are the primary funding sources. So the additional cost creep, if you will, that's not going to impact Measure S because those other funding sources have the capacity to take on the additional costs. So that should not.
the incremental expense, it was or revenue, incremental expense, it was approved. The funding for that came out of non-Measure S.
Correct.
Fine.
Yes. Thank you for saying it better than I did.
Yeah,
My hand's back up.
okay. Thank you, Rich, and over to Rich.
Just to clarify, I thought not only from state funds, but from Measure W, but Measure A also has some street and road money too.
Correct. It is quite a patchwork of funding sources, both local and state, that we use for our street improvement funding sources.
Yeah,
Is that the end of your question, Rich?
that certainly is. My hand's coming down.
Thank you. So over to Thomas.
Along the street improvement projects, I've noticed the last several months gas prices have been going up quite a bit. Does that help us get more revenues in, or does it not really impact us that much?
I've been noticing the same, and it's a double-edged sword where yes, as consumers we're paying more. However, the League of California Cities and the state recently came out with revised gas tax estimates for the current fiscal year and for next fiscal year. I did do an analysis and compared to the budget for the current fiscal year, and really is fairly equivalent for both years. The difference was about a little over $100,000, where compared to what we had budgeted versus what the latest estimate is, we're looking at about $100,000 shortfall for both years. I should say each year. When I looked at the balance sheet for the gas tax fund, it has the capacity, in the event that that comes to fruition, or we're $100,000 less than what we anticipate in revenues, it has the capacity to absorb that variance. So I'm not concerned. We haven't over-programmed the gas tax as a funding source, predominantly for CIP projects, to the extent that it can absorb that variance. One of the nice elements of SB1 was that in addition to creating the road rehabilitation funds, it also added a CPI increment to all of the existing highway user taxes funds. So that did not exist before, hence why our gas tax, prior to that, our gas tax revenues were effectively flat. So that's really helped, and it has helped to offset the drop in consumption. Now, yes, we may be paying more at the pump now, and that might nominally help increase the revenues to closer to budget, I hope. We get another update from the state. It's probably going to be at least 7 or 8 months before we get the next update on gas tax.
Okay, Thomas, do you have any other questions?
Not at this time.
Okay. All right, then let's move on.
I just wanted to recap for the committee, thanks to your support and your recommendations, the specific capital improvement program projects that are going to be funded for next fiscal year. So of course, there's the neighborhood traffic management at $250,000. In addition, there's the citywide street reconstruction at $800,000. As a reminder, that $800,000, that's our pay-go. So that's what we have in addition to the bond proceeds to fund citywide street reconstruction. There's also the park restroom refurbishment. That's phase 4. That's $478,000. And per the committee's guidance and recommendation, we're going to be going with our Parks and Recreation Director's request of getting, and I cannot remember the name of the material, but the material that is easiest to clean up and of the highest quality. So that's reflected in the $478,000 CIP appropriation. There's also the King and Joinville changing room improvements. That's $215,000. And then finally, the storm drain condition assessment program at $250,000. So all told, that's $2 million that's $1.9 million in CIP support from Measure S, thanks to the Oversight Committee's support.
Does anyone have questions before we leave this page? No? Okay, well, I have two.
Please.
Okay. Could you go back?
Yes.
Thanks so much. number one, in terms of the neighborhood traffic management, is what, please help me remember what exactly is within that. There's a traffic police officer, I believe, is part of it. Is that correct?
Oh boy, I think that historical aspect of that it's going to be beyond before I joined the city, so I'd have to
Okay.
consult my
Because
predecessor who.
The original
that.
Measure S in traffic, it was about hiring a traffic officer. So I'm
Mhm.
assuming that that's Rich.
And
Yeah, you're
And it-
absolutely right. It was at least one officer, maybe two.
Because 280,000, was it $280,000? That's more probably than one.
They had to put him on a wheel, a
Right.
motorcycle. I noticed it. I mean, motorcycle flying around here.
Right, because that, there definitely has been positive feedback for that. And then my my other question, perhaps this is a question for Samantha Weigel as opposed to here, but this is something that really should be promoted across the city. You know, here's what's going to be coming. Here's what's happening to your Measure S dollars. I think the committee has always said it's very important to report back to the residents and the taxpayers what's happening with the money rather than just saying we're using it. So I would love to see some kind of formal communication program and I would, defer to the city as to how to best do that. But that goes back and says to the residents and the taxpayers and the businesses who are paying it, here's where your money's going and here's how it's going to help.
Thank you for the suggestion. I'll touch base with Samantha tomorrow.
Would other people on the committee agree with me?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Thank you. It's a great opportunity. It's great news.
Through the chair, you reminded me of a correspondence that I wanted to make sure that the committee was aware of that came, and I'm probably going to butcher the last name, Kuhre. I don't know how to pronounce that, but Miss Kerr.
Cure.
Cure, thank you. Ms. Cure wanted to send an email to the whole committee. We actually do have an email address for the whole committee, but it was not set up correctly, so it didn't go anywhere. But let me, if I may, I wanted to read it to the committee. Dear members of the Measure S Oversight Committee, I understand I owe you all a big thank you for endorsing the reinstatement of funding that was to go to traffic support to hire 2 new officers to manage traffic in our city. The police department is doing a great job and making a difference. Thank you for supporting the concerns of our neighborhoods and making safety a priority for our citizens. And I will be forwarding this to you as a committee, just to acknowledge your efforts as a committee and how it's benefited your fellow residents.
That's great.
Very nice, Rich. Thank you for sharing that.
Of
I
course.
think Anna sent me a CC on it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So has whatever problem there was with the email address been fixed?
It hasn't, and here's why. And this is because we are subject to the Brown Act. I don't think it would be a good idea for residents to contact the committee as a whole, because there may be, essentially, if 3 of you were to contact or respond to Ms. Cure, then that could potentially be a violation of the Brown Act. So instead, we can, I guess this is the first time that correspondence has been sent to the whole committee that I'm aware of. We could determine a way for me to convey this to you as a group, or we could agree that the committee will not respond in whole, or it could just be that all communications come from the chair, or responses to email communications. I just want to make sure that we do not run afoul of the Brown Act.
Has this issue been, have other boards and commissions or even the city council?
I think I can answer that,
Okay,
if you don't mind.
Rich, please.
So other committees that I'm on, and especially one regional committee, leave a time for emails to come in to staff. by 5 p.m. the day before the meeting. And then the request is made when public comment is made. Were there any written comments? And then those are read to the board. So that may be one way to deal with this, Rich, is that we just simply have them all directed to you.
Mhm.
And if you read them under public comment. Because it's kind of what you did today.
Yes, that works for me if it works for the committee.
Makes sense. Vince, Thomas?
Yeah,
Naomi?
on this letter, I'm just curious, and you probably don't know if you read the entire thing. Was there any communication or incident recently related to the traffic management and the officers that prompted that? Or did it just come out of nowhere as far as we know?
I can actually speak to that. The person who wrote the email, this has been a very important issue to her for a very long time. So she keeps a very close eye on what's going on. So she probably, she would have figured this out long before the average resident would have.
Okay.
And they've been very visible over on the east side.
Yes, absolutely.
Saw them writing a ticket the other day and then sitting in the Lincoln building, kind of back was an officer with a radar gun the other day.
Yep.
So I was very happy to see that because Fashion Island, once you go over the bridge, becomes a speedway.
Yep. Vince, was that your question or did you have another question?
No, that's it. Is this also, I see these announcements periodically when we notify citizens of DUI checkpoints, stops, which I always thought was kind of odd that you would tell everybody where they're going to be and when. But is that something that's required by law that notification go out, or is that it's not necessarily just San Mateo? I saw one most recently from a neighboring city. Is that in any way connected to this? The
That I
traffic
don't know.
management, the DUIs are not, checkpoints are not related to this traffic management.
Yeah, I don't think those are related, but I'm not aware of the legal requirement.
Okay. That's fine, thank you.
Great. Are there any other questions of Rich on this?
I do have just one question, more of a finance question. And that is when Measure S funds are allocated to departments, it's always for specific programs and for specific fiscal years. And when something like the pandemic happens and that kind of like throws things off and programs that were going to go forth don't or are more limited, what happens to the Measure S funds? Are they given the money and then meaning it goes to them, or is that something that happens more at the end?
That's a great question. And if I recall, committee member Simonides had a similar question from the last meeting. The answer is any appropriations, I should say all appropriations, except for CIP appropriations, lapse at the end of the fiscal year. So what that means is if there are unspent appropriations or there's budget authority that was not used, that remains with Measure S. So it doesn't get transferred to the department. There's one exception to that, other than CIP. If there is, let's say we enter into a contract specific to Measure S, and it's a signed obligation, that would be reserved for encumbrance. So if you recall the balance sheet report that I provided to you, one of those equity accounts was the reserve for encumbrance. So any contractual liability that would be reserved and not available for appropriation. Everything outside of CIP and encumbrance, that's that unrestricted surplus that becomes available for the city council to appropriate again.
Okay, thank you.
Vince, you have your hand up again. Then you're on mute, but I think you're saying I'm going to take my hand down. Excellent. Rich Hedges, did you have a question?
Yeah, I think what you're talking about, Rich, is when we have surplus, we've made recommendations to the city council on what to do with it, if I'm not mistaken. For instance, money for flood wall, a small amount of additional money to the library, things like that when we had excess funding.
And that's something that we can discuss at the next committee meeting. We have, approximately $5.5 million in cash as a part of the next funding requests / considerations. What the committee would recommend to do with those funds, we can revisit that. My recollection from the approximately 2 years ago conversation was the spirit of Measure S was largely for street rehabilitation and to use any remaining funds available towards PAYGO. Now, obviously, there have been changing priorities or other high priority capital improvements that may also meet that Measure S appropriate funding needs, and we can always revisit that at the pleasure of the chair or the committee. We can always revisit that conversation at any time.
Okay, Rich, any other comments?
No, I'm taking my hand down.
Okay, thank you. So back over to you, Richley.
And I'm looking at my staff report and I'm embarrassed to see a typo. The recommendation, it should say, recommend that the Measure S Oversight Committee approve or recommend that the City Council adopt the Measure S proposed 2021-2022 budget. So that's the recommendation before you this evening.
I would like to make a motion. Have my hand up.
Is there a second?
I'll
A
second.
second.
Okay, the motion,
Pardon me, I couldn't quite gauge who made the motion. I'm
Rich
sorry, who was that?
It was Rich Hedges.
Okay, thank you. And the second was from whom?
Thomas can have it.
Okay.
we're a very collaborative bunch.
Fabulous. Okay, I'll do a roll call vote now. Chair Diaz-Nash,
Aye.
Vice Chair Hedges,
Aye.
Committee Member Chu,
Aye.
Committee Member Morgan,
Aye.
Committee Member Simonitis. You were muted, but I think I heard an aye.
Yes, aye.
Thank you. Okay, motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. All right, so Rich, do you have everything you need from us this evening?
I do, and thank you to the committee for your support.
Okay, and is there, Rich Hedges, is there something else you'd like to say? And you're muted. You're muted.
Thank you. I just wondered if at some point we're supposed to, even though there's nobody else here, ask for public comment to make the record clear.
It's a good point. Thank you very much.
I've been monitoring the attendee list and we have had no members of the public present throughout the meeting.
So then I have opened public comment. And now I'm going to close public comment, seeing as how there are no public attendees, but thank you very much, Rich, for reminding us. So is there any other comments, suggestions, topics that are relevant to this meeting that anyone would like to bring up? No? Okay, well then I will say thank you everyone for being so supportive. Thank you, Rich, and thank you, Aaron, for helping us do our job. And we look forward to hearing how we're going to let the public know about how the funds have been spent, as well as how they will be spent going forward, because that's a very important part of our oversight responsibility.
So the next regularly scheduled meeting of the Measure S Oversight Committee, I'm showing as Thursday. Actually, that can't be right. Is it right? No. I went too far, but I was looking at
No. Yeah.
I was looking at November, like, no, I'm pretty sure we meet sooner than that. But
Seems like it'd be August.
yes, August is, I probably clicked too fast, but yes, probably August.
August 19th or 26th, probably.
Is there a specific?
19th.
And that's going to be like middle of summer and we probably won't have anything, right? I feel like it was canceled last August.
I think you're correct as well. So Thursday, August 19th is our next regularly scheduled meeting, and always
That's-
happy
yeah,
to entertain any agenda topics that the chair may want to discuss.
okay. And this one is at 6 PM as opposed to 6:30?
Yes, and I appreciate the committee's indulgence in moving our meeting back a little bit later.
Great. And could you just, for belts and suspenders purposes, resend all the members of the committee the meeting dates going forward?
Absolutely, yes, I will send that as well.
Okay,
Thank you, Rich, for making this very clear for someone that's not in your profession.
Anytime, my pleasure.
absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, well then, if there are no other comments, Rich Hedges, your hand is still up. Was there anything else you wanted to say?
No, I'm just violating the principle that I said I'd always take your hand down.
Okay, well, you just got a nice hand. What can we say? So I would like to thank everyone, and I would like to call the meeting adjourned at 7:11 PM and wish you all a good evening, and I will see a couple of you very shortly.